is amazing. All right, so we have just come around full circle now from talking about some of the global issues with age tech and what we're seeing with fragmentation of digital health technologies in different communities to now understanding some of the nuance to digital health technology and cardiovascular care. And we are going to now talk about something that I think everyone is hearing a lot about and would like to understand a lot more about, which is value-based care. And so one of the more novel models that the HITLAB has found over the last year is around this idea of value-based care and how digital health infrastructure has been developed now to help promote value-based care, to support value-based care. And one of the national experts in this area is Scott Kornhauser, who is someone who has proven himself over the last few decades as an executive who understands market demand and is one of those very unique executives that has an understanding of how the healthcare services in the United States are delivered and, more importantly, reimbursed on a scalable and sustainable way. And that's why, in a lot of ways, we don't have a 16-year-old developing digital health unicorns or healthcare unicorns. Healthcare in the United States is so complex and so messy, if you will, that it takes about 20 years of experience to really understand it and then to develop some of the billion-dollar unicorns we've seen over the last 10 years, particularly with companies like PillPack, Discount RX, both selling for about $1 billion to McKesson and to Amazon. And they were both started by teams of executives that were in their mid to late 40s out of Cardinal and companies like that. And so Scott has that kind of DNA. And so to really give us a lot more insight on what's happening with the digital health infrastructure and the digital health reset in conjunction and with this energy building around value-based care is Scott Kornhauser from Chicago, Illinois. Scott.
Thank you, Stan, for the generous introduction. I hope in 15 minutes I can live up to it. I want to first thank and introduce my partner, Bert Zwigenhaft. Bert is my co-founder in KlearTrust. We've been germinating this concept for over 4 years. Bert's work at the Association for Value-Based Cancer Care, where he is the founder, led to the genesis, really, of KlearTrust, as well as his work through Upstream Partners, his consulting firm, where he works with life sciences companies on their strategy around value-based care and contracting as it applies to the life sciences industry. And that work led to this concept of KlearTrust, but we'll talk about that later. So there's a lot of data on this slide, but the story is really in the top right-hand corner. By 2028, it's predicted that the US drug spend for pharmaceuticals is going to be close to $800 billion, if not exceeding. And remarkably, this year, the spend on specialty medications exceeded 50% of the total US drug spend this year. So relatively speaking, a handful of specialty medications cost more than all those maintenance drugs for heart disease and for diabetes and all those other maintenance conditions. On top of that, we have all these other data points. The number of Americans living with rare diseases is increasing. The number of medications to treat those orphan and rare diseases are being introduced at a breakneck speed as compared to what happened historically, as the FDA has now accelerated the approval process, and the pharmaceutical companies have gotten much more efficient at bringing these new agents to market. The government is not asleep at the wheel. Everyone is focused on value-based care for the last decade, and there's all kinds of numbers around the market in terms of what percentage of reimbursement today is under value-based agreements. Most providers will agree that over 75% of their income today is in some way, shape, or form based on some kind of outcomes or performance measure. And CMS has been increasingly writing new rules and legislation to encourage value-based contracting, value-based agreements, including in the pharmaceutical space, where just as recently in the last year, they made some really truly breakthrough new rules to pave the way with pharmaceutical manufacturers who previously were handicapped to some extent by Medicaid and other best price rules, which limited their ability to negotiate into creative new payment models for pharmaceuticals, especially the high cost ones. It's also important to note that as the cost of drugs has gone up for these specialty medications, and as they increasingly are a larger portion of the total share of total spend, patients are finding it increasingly difficult to pay for those drugs. The co-insurance alone for a high-cost specialty drug for a Medicaid patient could exceed their total income for the year. And so consequently, the number of patients abandoning these scripts is extremely high and at an alarming rate. So value-based care for a long time now, for over a decade, and there's no indication that it's going to slow, although it's been, like everything in healthcare, a complicated journey, is really at the heart of every value-based care model is a value-based contract. And at the heart of that contract is some kind of performance warranty. Somebody is warranting something in terms of a product or a service or an outcome. And pharmaceutical value-based agreements are warranties that tie the drug's payment to some kind of clinical or economic measure or endpoint. You could think of this as the anatomy of a pharmaceutical-based value-based agreement. It's complicated. We like to say that it should be complex. What we found over the last decade in value-based contracting in general, not just for pharmaceuticals, but across the spectrum, is that we have a tendency in the marketplace, oddly enough, in a market, in an industry that prides itself in its technology, we have a tendency to dumb these agreements down because everyone has been stifled by, afraid of the data. And so these agreements have been made really, really simple because everyone wants the measures and the data that supports the measures to be really easy to implement and operationalize and execute. And as a consequence, oftentimes, particularly in pharmaceuticals, we've found that the results or the value that's been extracted from these agreements has also been minimal. It's been reduced or minimized by simplifying these agreements because we've been afraid of the data. But value-based contracts for pharmaceuticals include both a clinical guarantee, what is the clinical value that the drug is going to produce, but also then potentially alternative payment models and pricing models that are paired with that clinical guarantee. And that can be very complicated, especially if the value construct on the far left-hand side that's being used to design that guarantee is on a total cost of care model, where the pharma is saying, we're not just clinically guaranteeing and warranting the cost of the drug therapy, but we're warranting that our therapy will reduce or avoid total cost of care costs, which implies, of course, a lot of complexity then in terms of data and performance measurement. So for over a decade in value-based contracting for value-based care, we've been suffering from these analog problems in this incredibly digital world that we've been talking about all day. There's been first a lack of trust because there's been such a lack of automation and digitization. There's a lot of distrust around how data is interpreted, how these measures are computed and calculated for performance and quality and outcomes. Consequently, again, creating a lack of trust between stakeholders at either side of that agreement. There's been a lack of automation, as I've already mentioned. And there's been a lack of complexity, as I've mentioned. Instead of having technology to meet the requirements of these, what could be, should be, would be very complex agreements with very complex measures, with very complex data requirements, we've again tended to dumb them down. A great example in pharmaceuticals, in the specialty world, we see a lot of value-based agreements where the only measure is adherence. And contractually, these adherence agreements, all they require zero data. All they require is that the physician attest, sign an attestation form that the patient failed therapy and discontinued therapy, and here's why. And then lastly, there's been, and probably most importantly, a lack of timely performance insights. So for 4 years in our work at the Association for Value-Based Cancer Care and at Upstream and with life sciences consulting engagements, we've heard over and over and over again as we've interviewed the market, providers, physicians, specialists, hospitals, a common battle cry. For all of value-based care and contracting, we have to manage our performance through the rearview mirror. Because 100% of value-based agreements in the market for the past decade have been administered retrospectively. Everyone signs a contract, a bunch of data is aggregated for 30, 60, 90, 120 days. An analytic engine runs a bunch of measures and produces a scorecard. The provider gets the scorecard and says, okay, now I think I know what I have to do next quarter, and sets out hopefully to improve. So at KlearTrust, our mission, our objective is to go digital. It's to raise the bar, enable those insights, and to be able to inform every endpoint in the care delivery of a drug therapy to know when their performance is suboptimal, when they're doing something that could potentially void the warranty that the manufacturer has put on the table. You can't see the bullets at the bottom, but it's all about doing this in real time, providing concurrent feedback, situational awareness to every endpoint in the network, including the patient, when there's, again, something happening that's contrary to the rules or the terms of the agreement. So if you think about it, we're all familiar, we buy a toaster, we buy a set of tires, we buy a car, we buy a television set. There's a 20-page warranty with fine print, inclusions and exclusions as to the representation of the terms of that warranty. In healthcare, it's even more complicated, surprise. And so the goal of KlearTrust is to take that complexity, and instead of handing you a 20-page document with fine print, we turn that into a computable agreement, represented by rules and algorithms and measures that we can adjudicate in real time. And so we operationalize that complexity, not with big data. We're not about aggregating data so we can run a report card 90 days later, but it's about transactional analytics. It's about updating the patient record as they go through their journey. And each time that record is updated, present it to the contract rules engine. And again, determine if anything's going on that is inconsistent with the warranty. Not so that we can contractually deny claims, to the contrary, so that we can continuously improve care and outcomes. Because we can continuously inform everybody in the delivery of care when they're performing suboptimally. So if there's one thing we've heard today, probably 100 times, is it's all about the data. I said it's all about the blank data. I know what you're thinking, but that's not the word I was thinking of. The data is complex and it's ever changing in terms of its complexity. Every day, someone thinks of some new data element that's relevant to that patient journey. And depending on the terms of the value-based contract, likewise, that data can be relevant. But it's really all about the computable data, and this is what's been the greatest handicap in operationalizing and making computable these value-based contracts in all their complex glory. It's been that we've gotten really good at moving data from point A to point B through interoperability standards, which are now becoming ubiquitous. But what we've still continue to struggle with is once we land the data where we've sent it, making it computable and understandable is still a tremendous challenge that needs to be dealt with not only in batch, but again, in a real-time transactional way. Lo and behold, our government comes through with the 21st Century Cures Act. It makes data blocking illegal. It accelerates the adoption of the FHIR standard for real-time interoperable movement of healthcare and sharing of healthcare data. And it makes patient access to that data the law. So KlearTrust is all about creating the data circuits to the endpoints in these tiny little networks that service these rare disease patients that are consuming these high-cost specialty drugs, brings that data into a data store that in real-time transactionally can make that data computable by making it semantically interoperable, not just moving blobs from point A to point B, and serving it up then to a rules engine that in real time can transact that data against the rules that represent a contract. And if anything is detected that's inconsistent or inappropriate, it can communicate to that endpoint. So if you follow the wheel starting at the top, going clockwise, that's the journey and the workflow of a specialty drug therapy as the patient goes through their journey and as the drug and the product goes through its journey. And our job is to, again, ingest data from any endpoint in the journey that is relevant to the terms of the contract. From the payer to the distributor, the credentialing function to make sure providers know how to participate and sign up to participate, to the delivery of care down the bottom from diagnosis to prescribing to actual care delivery, to the whole patient support function, which in the specialty world is a whole industry in and of itself. There's over 50 specialty pharmacy hubs that exist just to onboard these specialty patients onto their complex specialty drug therapies. Through the dispensing and administration events, and then continuously we're communicating and measuring performance to the network until ultimately we get to a point of reconciliation, because it's all about, at the end of the day, tying reimbursement or pricing payment to performance. So it is complex, but we've just spent a full day talking about applying the digital world to the world of healthcare. There's nothing that I've just spoken about that is new technology. All the technology exists in the market. It's a question of assembling it, orchestrating it, and applying it to this use case. And so we take pharmaceutical companies through this journey. We help them identify and design a computable agreement without sacrificing complexity, which more often than not sacrifices outcomes, both financial and clinical, and create a digital design that optimizes the equation for all the stakeholders, including the patient, the payer, the provider, and the pharma. And I think I'm out of time. What, time for questions or no?
Sure. Somebody's got a quick question.
Yep. Any questions? No question. Thanks.
I have the enviable job of keeping you all in your seats for a few more minutes. I should say unenviable. First, thank you all. And thanks to all of our speakers. This has been an extraordinary event in terms of both content and insights. And I'd like everybody who learned something surprising, raise their hand. All right, phenomenal success. Thank you all for that. Secondly, thank you for your patience. For those of you who are not data geeks, you probably didn't keep track, but I've been keeping track. We've sat on a chair for at least 7 hours. We've listened to 24 sessions. 19 of them were either presentations or panel discussions, and 5 were presentations of some really interesting and I think urgent new solutions to the broad needs of the healthcare ecosystem. I promised you this morning that we were going to explore, discuss, and possibly celebrate digital health. I think we did that. Digital health was the shorthand for tech-enabled improvements broadly. The key issues of success I asked you to keep mindful of, were: can it work? Will it work? Does it work? Does it work in terms of value and economic benefits? Is it sustainable? And what will it take to accelerate? So as I polish the rearview mirror and give you, one person's perspective on what we've done in the last 7 hours, keep that in mind. I've got 4 points that I wrote down as interesting to me, and I hope you'll find them interesting as well. Point number 1, the goal of sustainable health and high quality of life for 8 billion people in this world still remains unmet. Unmet needs are high and varied, and the need is greater, as the various things that threaten our well-being and health impinge on everybody. And so the unmet needs in healthcare are as great as ever. And Patrick, thank you for reminding us early on, it's all about the unmet needs. Secondly, the ambition for innovation to satisfy those needs spreads across the entire landscape of healthcare, from providers to payers, to product companies, even to patients. And it also includes large companies and small entrepreneurial startups. And so in essence, the landscape is rich with need, and it's also rich with interest and rich with opportunity. Third, and Scott just mentioned it again, data is increasingly being the currency of healthcare innovation. Got that? It's all about the data. Now I'm going to step off to the side for a second, hit the pause button on my comments, and say it was all about the data when we got excited about personal healthcare records 10 years ago. Where are they? It was all about the data when we got excited about interconnected health information systems to connect healthcare systems in local geographies. Where are they? Some worked, many didn't. So it's all about the data, but data is insufficient. So we need to be mindful of it's not just about the data. How do you get it? What do you do with it? And how do you deliver the value from it? But, big but, money remains the essential fuel of achieving those innovations. And that essential fuel is becoming increasingly difficult to find in the next few years. So data is great, data is necessary, but unless you've got fuel, you're not going to move. Fourth point. What are the factors of success? We've seen this from a couple of dozen different perspectives. We've inferred it through the lens of our own experience. And so we've sort of had a walk around the elephant. We each see and hear and grab a different part, but I don't think we still understand what the elephant is. But there are some factors of helping diagnose that elephant or dissect the elephant that I think are important to remain mindful of. And the 2 most important that strike me are, first, you can't succeed without leadership. And leadership includes, again, Patrick, thank you, passion, mission, values, all focused on a commitment for transformation. In the absence of leadership, a good idea is just a shiny object. Secondly, a compelling business and financial model is absolutely necessary. And it's got to be clearly understandable, verified, because the model includes who gets the benefit and who pays for the benefit. And we live in a world where those are literally two different forces. I want the benefit as a patient. I want you to pay for me. And unless we create business models around these technologies that understand that dichotomy and that tension, we're going to have a struggle. Now, there are unicorns and there are successful point solutions, and we're going to see those in the future as we have in the past. But if we're looking for having transformational innovation, we've really got to understand the value proposition of benefit versus payment. So with that, that was my takeaway. Hopefully it adds to yours. I've got a couple of other final comments. One, next year, we're going to put on 2 summits, and we've now got a commitment for a summer summit in June 20 to 22, 3 days. And we'll be announcing that more broadly as we roll forward from here. And we'll also have another fall summit. And finally, oh, I lost this one. Oh, my goodness. Oh, here it is. Most important one. Open bar. We have an open bar networking reception starting 10 minutes at the Heights Bar and Grill. And it's about a 10-minute walk, 5 minutes if you walk fast, 2 minutes if you sprint. It's 2 blocks south on Broadway, and I'm hoping that we all have the stamina and willingness to go down there and share a cocktail or two and reflect on what we've learned today. I think that, this has been a long, rich set of discussions and insights. And I can tell you one thing, the world will be different tomorrow because we're all going to go into tomorrow with kind of a new insight and maybe a new passion to bring about a change. So thank you all very much. My applause for you. The bar is open.